Major funding for these broadcasts is made possible by grants from Chase Commercial Term Lending and New York Community Bank, M&T Bank, Perfect Building Maintenance, Capital One Bank, the Witkoff Group, Greenberg Traurig. Additional funding is provided by grants from AKA Hotels, Corman Communities, Aerial Property Advisors, AVR Realty Company, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Bank Leumi USA, Briarwood Organization, CBRE, Colliers International NYC, CPEX Real Estate Services, Cushman & Wakefield, Customers Bank, DDG, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Douglaston Development Levine Builders, Fisher Brothers, First Nationwide Title Agency, Flushing Bank, Foley & Lardner, Friedman LLP, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, HAP Investment Developers, Herrick Feinstein, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, James Orphanides, Chairman USRealty.com, John Katsimatidis, Red Apple Group, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, Madison Realty Capital, Massey Knuckle Realty Services, Matone Group, Mercantile Commerce Bank, Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Grubb Knight Frank, New Banks, MHP Real Estate Services, People's United Bank, SJP Properties, Sterling National Bank, Sterling & Sterling, Stonehenge Partners, TD Bank, Terra CRG, the Continuum Company, CUNY TV Foundation, the Moynihan Group, Urban American, and These Friends.
In the words of that great pitchman, Crazy Eddie, these prices are insane. This world is on fire. This market is high as a kite. Who knows what's going on? I really have no idea as I start my 14th season to see, have we reached the highest plateau in the real estate market? So today I've assembled these deans who've been involved with the real estate business for a couple of years to provide their insight on, I can't believe the prices today. My guests today include the legendary Allan V. Rose, Chairman and CEO of AVR Realty, Norman Sturner, the founding partner, CEO of MHP Realty Services, Ian Bruce Eichner, the Chairman and CEO of the Continuum Company, and last but not least, the kid over here, Steve Witkoff, the Chairman and CEO of the Witkoff Group. So Steve, you've been with me for many of the openings of the new season. Have you seen in your lifetime prices at these levels? Or we'll hear Norman in a second. You know, everything has to go up.
Prices are high, but on the other hand, interest rates are cheap, and New York City is relatively cheap compared to how I measure it. I don't measure it against necessarily other American cities, but against London and Hong Kong, it is cheap.
You know, you bring up the point about banks. Money is cheap. The banks forgot a couple of years ago what has happened. You know, if you went a couple of years ago, and I know you have great banking relationships with people, everyone sitting here has good banking relationships, and you said to them, I want you to give me money for a land loan. They would say, are you nuts? A land loan? A development loan? Today, the pricing is crazy. The construction lending pricing. Guarantees? Remember the word guarantee? I know Norman has never listened to that. I mean, Bruce, you've been in this market for over 40 years. You know, what do you see today?
Things are expensive.
But I believe you're building a great luxury condo tower on 22nd Street, and now you're building the first really massive major development on 125th Street and Park Avenue.
Those pieces of land were purchased basically in 2012. The land price was less than half of what it would be today. I mean, I'm in 22nd Street for less than in the 400s a foot. That today would be 1,200 a foot. So there's no comparison. The question is, what happens if you buy something for $1,200 a foot and you have to get $3,000 a foot on the other side, what's going to happen in 2016 and 17? What kind of competition do you have? And what kind of views do you have? You know, where is the building going to sit? What we've seen today has really been a reflection of the fact that there really has been no supply in the city. What's going to happen when there's a lot of supply?
Mr. Rose, you've seen a couple of ups, downs in your career. How do you read the market today, and how do you
Well, you
listen to
you have to differentiate between the condo market and the income building market. If you're buying a building that's got cash flow, and today you can get money at less than 4%, 10-year IO, if you've got a really good project, and you overpay for the building, you're making a spread on your money, regardless of how much you pay for it, for at least for 10 years. And most developers who are gamblers at heart believe that 10 years from today, things are going to be higher than they are now.
I mean, I'm sitting.
So I don't think, if you're talking about obtaining cash flow, you can buy buildings today and pay big prices, provided you know how to finance them properly.
But don't you like to make some money on these buildings? I know that you're a humanitarian, but you know, we do have real estate taxes that go up. We have insurance goes up. We have fuel costs that go up. I mean, you know.
Well, I think I do agree that that everything is overpriced. Bruce is talking about the cost of land. I honestly believe, and I'm doing this for a long, long time, that I ruined every piece of land I owned by building on it. Because the land today would be worth twice what the buildings
Wait a
became
second.
worth.
You know, only you could be in Yaphank, Long Island, and it only took you about 40 years to get the approvals?
No, my story in Yaphank is that 25 years ago, I was 6 months away from the approvals. Now I'm 3 months away. So
25 years and 3 months.
it's some of the problems we face in being developers.
Norman, from those days of being an accountant, I mean, look, you bought this property, you said, on Fifth Avenue a couple years ago. You had a Sims who was going to move in there. Filene's, you know, you had all of these things, and you just sold it for a couple of dollars. A nice little profit.
As Allan just said, it was better empty than it was full. 6 days after we bought it, Sims Filene's filed bankruptcy. We ran to the court to get back the lease. In 2.5 years, we have not put a tenant in there, and we just sold it for $5,000 a foot. Now, that's in excess of what I paid for the entire building. But what nobody wants to realize, all of your viewers ought to read Island at the Center of the World. And it's from the beginning of our incredible island, Manhattan, to the present day. They're not making any more land in Manhattan. I gave a speech in Canada to a lot of the pension folks. As Steve said, I listed the 10 most expensive cities to do business in. New York City wasn't on the list. We weren't in the first 10 people of the most expensive cities. We are less expensive than Mumbai. We are less expensive than Moscow. Forget the London and the Paris. This is an easy city to do business in. And nobody stands up at the end of the period and says, we just took your property. We just changed the rules yesterday for tomorrow. Doesn't happen here.
Prior to the show, Steve was saying that construction costs, labor costs, have gone up to a high level. And, you know, Bruce brought up the fact that, you know, how many people can buy $4,000, $5,000 per square foot apartments? I mean, you're involved with a couple of developments. You're finishing two major great projects that you sold out quicker than you even expected because of the market. Madison Square Park became a neighborhood again. Charles Street had become a neighborhood, and you're seeing what's happening on 7th Avenue. I mean, but if the labor costs and the material costs go up, there's a question of when and where.
Yeah, I mean, everyone I sold to, Michael, all the end users, and this was Allan's point before, they've all made money because the costs have gone up. I mean, those apartments are more valuable. We sold well anyway because we're good sellers. You know, I'm sort of guided by the fear of failure, so You know, that's why he sold Charles Street in 12 weeks. It sort of begs the question, could we have gotten more money? And clearly we could have, because it was an incredible site and many other people came into the market and sold for more. But I'm not sure that that we would have built those projects today with the costs as they are if we would have put those costs into our underwriting. Charles Street would have cost us 60, maybe 70 million more today to build than it did back then. And you know, from my perspective, the lenders I deal with, they really haven't changed their underwriting. Wells, M&T, they're conservative. The 55, 60% loans, that's how we finance.
But you know what? There are the private equity funds, there's the Blackstones, there's the Starwood, that they're pushing the envelope that you can get a higher amount of money at a different level.
Barry and John Gray, and yes, they're in there because they can balance sheet an entire loan and then move it out afterwards. Those guys are very smart guys. They're not doing stupid things. I mean, I'm not saying there aren't some silly things happening out there, but certainly not by a Barry Sternlicht or a John Gray.
You could have had this conversation 10 years ago. The numbers would have been in half, and the conversation would have been the same.
Yeah.
I think the
We're at
issue.
the
Wait a second,
market.
but what if I had this conversation in 2008?
Yes?
Tell me the conversation if it was in 2008.
I was gonna bring
The world is in...
Michael,
were deep enough in capital.
I had one thing I was going to bring up, which you started to allude to. I've been in every recession since the Great Depression, and it always happens. I mean, things go up, 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 and somewhere along the 1970s, the interest rates were 22%. Jimmy Carter was the president. We had nowhere to go. There was another one in the 80s. Certainly, 1990 was a disaster for everybody. 2008 was a disaster. So the question is not how high is everything, but how long before another recession comes along and bangs down the values. So my theory is to be very conservative, low loan to value, and hope for the best, because certainly, as sure as we're sitting here, this isn't going to just go straight up, because it never has.
Let's
and
look
it-
at
the
somebody. I mean, you were one of the first people, because you had a Howard Johnson restaurant out in Westchester, that you built a Howard Johnson motel.
1965.
So let's look at the hotel. And we were just talking before the show to Steve Witkoff about the amazing price that they sold the Park Hyatt in 57th Street, close to 1.9 million $1,900,000 a key. And what Barry Sternlicht is thinking about the back rack at over $2 million a key. There are economics to running an operation. It's different than the real estate business because it's a labor-intensive business. There are unions.
80% labor.
So there are different things. Why are people paying these prices for these hotels?
Well, hotels for a string of time can make a lot of money. If you ask me what goes up the fastest, the hotels go up the fastest, but they also go down the fastest. So if you have, and Manhattan, I have to agree with everything these guys have said. Manhattan is just the only place in the world that anything like this would work.
But you're...
Now, as long as people are going to come from every continent in the world and spend money in Manhattan and want to be in Manhattan because it's economical for them to do, and it's a safe place to park their money, they're going to do that.
Oh, but wait, you're,
I mean, I
you're
can't-
building in Westchester.
Right.
You're building in Putnam County. You're building in Long Island.
We're building all over the country.
You're building all over. And then you have a little hotel in New Orleans also, which has seen a great time.
Right.
But you know, Michael, it goes to what Norman was saying before, too. You could have had this same conversation 10 years ago. Well, look at the statistics of the visitors that are coming to New York City. When Mayor Bloomberg was in, and I actually had dinner with him, we were discussing this recently. When he first came in and they were projecting what the visitors into New York City would go to, I think they thought it was going to be 45 million.
Right, we hit 54 and a half.
56, I think the number was. I mean, that's 12 million more than projections. Why? There's a reason. Everybody wants to come here. Every kid graduating from college wants to work here. I mean, it's a fabulous city. You can walk the city. It's fun to be in. It's safe. People want to be here for all the right reasons.
You know, to a lesser extent, this is happening elsewhere too, not just Manhattan. So it's not so unusual. You go to Miami, you got hot money from all over the world coming into Miami. People want to live down there. People want to live in L.A.
But the difference there, Allan, is, And I've never been able to figure it out in Miami, how the three jurisdictions, Dade, City of Miami, and Miami Beach don't come together. The difference is you can't get a job down there. And that's the reason why Zell moved his whole operation out of Miami. I mean, he won't build rental anymore for that reason. And he's actually said it. But here, you can get a job. I mean, look at what Mayor Bloomberg did with the whole technology thing, creating that campus. And now we're the second largest producer of technology jobs in the country next to Silicon Valley. Software engineers who used to only go to Boston come here today. Google wants to be here. Twitter wants to be here. Facebook wants to be here. They have completely filled in. I'm not in the office building business as much as maybe Norman, but I think anyone would tell you, like, if you said to Mark Holliday, where do you want to buy today? I want to buy Midtown South because that's where the technology guys go. Those jobs have absolutely filled in what the gap that was created by Dodd-Frank, which, by the way, I don't mind saying is the most anti-New York law that's ever been put forth. But be that as it may, you can earn a living in this town, and people want to be here.
I think Allan's put his finger on something. I think the question is the city's multiple markets. The hotel market, the luxury hotel market, is a market unto itself. The office market, income-producing property, I mean, what is trading at the craziest multiples it's ever traded at, whether you call it residential rentals or you call it office buildings, is doing so, A, because interest rates are low, B, where else are you going to put your money? I mean, if you put it in a bank, you can't get a 1% return. The question really is because you started out asking the question, what about the high-end market? If there's a market that has, in my mind, some real vulnerability to it, it's the high-end residential condominium market where basically there is no such thing as an apartment in a piece of new construction that's less than $2,000 a square foot. And the implications, it's not just the luxury market, i.e. $4,000 a foot, and how much can the market absorb. It's also the reason why the borough of Brooklyn it's beyond on fire. It's steroids. I mean, if you take a look what's happened in Williamsburg in the last 10 years, it's remarkable. And it's pushed itself over to now Gowanus, Greenpoint, Sunset Park, because people can't afford to be in Manhattan. So the issue isn't, to me, the issue isn't, it's a question of what's going to happen to which segment of the market in 2016 or 17.
You bring up that. Let's talk about the luxury office market. I mean, we have a couple of new office buildings, spec office buildings. 40th, 7 Bryant Park over there. But you also have a big vacancy. Condé Nast is going to move out. There's going to be market over there. You have Boston Properties property on 55th Street, which had some hype, which I believe they still have certain vacancy. You have a number of properties on planned for the Hudson Yards. So there are different markets. I don't see these markets being at $150 a foot when rents were reaching higher levels.
Okay. For Murray Hill, it's what we choose to compete against. We don't have $150 foot rentals. We make a living. We make a profit at $65 a foot rentals. On the other hand, our portfolio, which is a little bit over 6 million feet, is in the high 90s as an occupancy level. We look forward, we talked about it in the green room. We're in the 5th inning of this game. And I speak a half a dozen times a year, and I have never heard anybody say we're in the 7th, 8th, or 9th. Not to say we shouldn't be worried, and not to say you shouldn't be concerned if you're in the high end of the market. But take a look at L&L, 2 really bright guys. They are a year and a half away from starting construction at 425 Park. They need $100, $150 a foot. They're not dumb. The banks are not dumb. The construction people are not dumb, okay? And they have shown a history of making money every time they did something. When I look around at my colleagues in the office market, I'm always the last guy that they say overpaid. Okay, sorry. But it turns around that at the end of the day, 2.5 years later, 30 to 60 months later, I haven't overpaid. because the market has caught us.
I remember my buddy over here sitting with me saying, I always loved the Brill building because, you know, he loved.
So did I.
Okay.
I love the musical history.
He
of
loved
Brill
the musical history.
The money didn't hurt either, but I love the musical history of the
But, you know,
Brill
he
building.
went to Times Square. You know, he was a kid from Brooklyn, you know, the Bay Parkway area. He goes to Times Square, and it was timing. But if you had, as what Norman said, holding power,
Yeah.
right?
And he does.
Right, we do.
And that's what happened, right?
But I have to tell you this. I think
Excuse
it's
me
a
a
credit
moment.
to the city and the economy of the city and the values that are inherent in New York City real estate that building can go from a very high price we paid in 2008 to not only come back to what we paid for it, but surpass it to the point where we can make a nice profit on the deal.
I want to tell a funny Allan Rose story. I buy the Brill building. Allan is a gentleman. There's never a word of retrading. We're done. I'm in it for a year and a half, and Ofer and Invesco and everybody else calls, and they name a price. We're done. That's what we do for a living. Fund sold. It's a week later. Allan calls. I want you to know you're the reason I'm retiring, but it's a real voice. I said, "Oh God, Allan? What did I do?" He said, "I held that building for so many years. You made more
20
money. You made more money in a year and a day." He said, I'm out of the business." And then he started to laugh.
You know,
Thank God.
You know, Bruce brought up before, you know, Brooklyn on steroids. I think people are saying that Long Island City is becoming a market.
That's the next.
The next market with regard to both residential rentals, condos, and office. You know, back because it has the unique office space. You know,
Well, it
people-
also has the view of Manhattan.
right,
You don't get that in Manhattan.
And you also have
One of the
great
problems I
transportation.
have in trying to evaluate, you know, we've looked at a lot of deals to build new office buildings, we've looked at a lot of deals to buy office buildings. There's so many different areas. Is the city going to move west to Hudson Yards? Is it going to move to Brooklyn, to Atlantic Yards? Is it going to move down to the World Trade Center? Is it going to move to Harlem? There's so many variations.
Yeah, but
Today to build an office building, you got to have 400,000 or 500,000 square foot tenant signed before you go. Now that tenant is going to eat your heart out because you've got the choices of all of these different places to go. So it becomes more and more difficult to justify giving a 500,000 square foot tenant a sweetheart deal. There's all kinds of different tax incentives depending on where you are. So it's very hard to try to say, well, this is where the tenants are going to go, or there's where the tenants are going to go.
you know,
Now, if you're wrong for a lot of money.
I've heard about what's the group's thoughts of the Hudson Yards on the far west side, Stevie. I mean, you have a lot of properties that you've bought. You've done a number of things. Norman, one of his first buildings was 449th Avenue before the time. Okay, I worked across the street at 441 9th Avenue, a company called Hartfield Zodi's. Nobody went there.
When I bought it was 370 West 35th Street. We opened up 9th Avenue.
What do you?
I mean, I echo what Norman said about David and Rob, Steve Ross and Jeff. You know, they don't do anything silly, and so.
That's not Steve. I'm talking, but there are other people over there.
But they started it, right?
They started it, but Brookfield is building.
And then Jerry came in, and there's a lot of smart people there. But on the other hand, I think if you talk to Jeff or Steve, they would say to you that they're building office today, at least at cost, developing infrastructure, and then later on they make money on the residential. And they made a very, very good deal with the city.
It's staying power, Steve. You're absolutely correct.
Right. So, and and by the way, they're smart. They brought good partners in. They got the Canadian pension funds in there. Now they have ADIA in there, the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority. So they've hedged their bets very, very well. But the city has to grow. That's the logical place for it to grow.
Absolutely.
Now, besides the logical place like Allan just brought up, and Bruce is involved with Harlem, the site that you bought at one time was going to be a hotel. At one time, Major League Baseball was talking about making an office space over there. You know, there's limited amount of property. What's the generic thought of Harlem today for office and other use?
Go back 10 years. Would Bruce have been building that in Harlem? Not a chance. The city reinvents itself every 5 years. And the idea about who the new mayor is, the city just continues to roll on.
Well, I think Allan, it's an extension of Allan's point, and Norman's point, which is what's really happened is the growth in the city is now, it's now in virtually every borough. I mean, you have Astoria in Queens, you've got Long Island City in Queens, you've got Williamsburg, which is now over, by some people's pricing metrics, overpriced. You've got rents hitting $70 a foot. I think, and you clearly,
yeah.
and you clearly have, I mean, Harlem, where you basically, it's probably the most underpriced land in the city. I think one of the real questions is how are we going to deal with this issue that the current mayor has raised about affordability? Because you really have two markets here. You've got markets for whether you call it condos at $2,000 a foot, or now Brooklyn, which appears to be inexpensive at $1,000 to $1,200 a foot. That still means an apartment of 1,000 feet is $1,200,000.
I was with someone yesterday who is the biggest developer next to Related in Roosevelt Island, which is Manhattan. And he was telling me that he has unlimited inclusionary housing, unlimited, that he can sell in the community boards, relating to it. And I said, what do you want? He says, I want $400 for an inclusionary housing. He says, but do you know what you get? You can go up by 20% on the building. I said, but that's $400 for the air that you're selling me. The question. So, you can grow density, and that's part of the key, is the ability to build density. But, I'm hearing two boroughs I have not heard about. The Bronx, which today is celebrating the opening of the largest mall in the city of New York, and Staten Island. What's your thoughts
Staten
about that?
Island's a little weird. I mean, I built more houses in Staten Island than anybody. Built thousands of houses over there. And it is what it is. It's a
Bedroom
middle
community.
class bedroom community that nobody's going to pay more than a small amount of money for a house or an apartment.
But you know what? It's an
And
affordable place.
It's almost
for
not
people to work.
It's almost not part of New York City. It's more
there is
more
a
akin
ferry.
to Rockland County.
There's a
than New
ferry.
York City.
There's
I'm
a
talking
bridge.
economically.
The Bronx?
I don't see Staten Island developing in any major form at all. Queens, yes. Brooklyn, of course.
Norman, you don't know what the Bronx is.
I don't go there.
I go there quite a bit, and I hope it has its renaissance. And I think it, is much better than.
Yeah, but
it was
going to
20 years
Arthur
ago.
Avenue for dinner is not is not developing in the Bronx.
No, I agree with you, but there's not a market there right now for that.
So
But if you bring up transportation, there are hundreds of acres in the South Bronx that if you bring the transportation back just the way they did the 7 line up to the
Right.
west side,
TODs are the key. 26
And
minutes
that's
for
the
this group
city.
is impossible. So I promise on the 14th season to have all of you back. I'd like to thank Allan Rose,
Thank you.
Norman Sturner,
Thank you.
Ian Bruce Eichner,
Thank you.
and needless to say, Steve Witkoff. See you next week.